Snow blanketed the lake in white while the wind howled in sharp, icy gusts. A canine dog suddenly charged across the frozen surface, barking loudly then furiously clawing at a spot near the shore. The snow cracked open. A rusted piece of metal emerged, accompanied by a powerful foul stench. The officer following behind froze in place. That was not a drainage pipe. It was a tunnel entrance, and what lay inside would shake the entire small town of Frostmill to its core. Frostmill is the kind of name that, if you ask anyone living more than 300 miles away, they would almost certainly never have heard of it. A town tucked into the side of the old stone mountains, where snow begins to fall as early as October and does not melt until summer is nearly at the door. The whole area is covered in a strange kind of silence, not the peaceful silence of nature, but the kind that comes from things no one wants to talk about. Frostmill was once a hub for cross-border freight transport to and from Canada, mostly industrial chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and lab reagents. Convoys of 18-wheelers would roll down the main highway, unloading cargo at a processing plant near Lake Vesper. It was a short-lived boom, but just long enough for the locals to feel proud. Until the winter of 1994. A chemical accident happened at the plant described officially as a severe leak with potential discharge of Class D toxic substances. The plant was shut down. Lake Vesper, the town's main water source, was permanently sealed off. Fences went up, red warning signs were nailed around the area, and residents were told to stay away due to risk of residual exposure. But here is what was strange. No one in Frostmill was ever given widespread medical screening after the incident. No one ever saw an environmental cleanup crew arrive. No public statements were made. Only one thing remained: fear, and a silence that spread like frostbite. After the accident, the town slowly shrank. The plant was left to decay. The school closed down. The younger residents moved away. But the most troubling thing was not that. It was the trucks. Dark trucks. No headlights, no license plates. They would show up at night driving along the forest roads near Lake Vesper. Some locals who lived near the northern woods claimed that during the winter nights, they could hear the crunch of heavy tires rolling across ice and snow, stopping near the lake's edge, then vanishing before sunrise. There was no official road leading out there, and the area had been sealed off for more than 30 years. But tire tracks were often still there, sometimes freshly pressed into the clean white snow. People whispered that the trucks were military, still transporting leftover chemicals. Others thought they might belong to smugglers or illegal hunters running cross-border trade. But whatever they were, no one dared to get close enough to find out. The trauma from the chemical spill had taught everyone in Frostmill the easiest way to survive: do not look, do not ask, do not get involved. And then came the disappearances. In less than 3 years, nearly 20 people vanished from Frostmill. All of them were drifters, addicts, loners, with no families. People who had passed through the community support center, a place that was supposed to help with recovery, but was better known as the place you entered easily, and rarely came out of. Police reports were clear. Left the program voluntarily, or unconfirmed overdose, may have relocated. No one reopened the files. No searches were launched. The missing were treated as though they had never existed. Every trace was buried beneath the snow, just like the way the whole town had learned to bury its suspicions deep under the cold, as far down as possible. And if it had not been for the canine dog Kane, those layers of ice might have kept thickening for many more years. Kane was not born in Frostmill, and he was not even an official member of the town's police force. He had been transferred here the previous winter inside a steel crate covered in a gray blanket, accompanied by a short file that read Malinois. Arizona Border Unit specializes in detecting rare opioids, no longer suitable for emergency operations. Kane used to be part of a drug enforcement team, along the Mexico border. He was the best dog in the unit, able to detect fentanyl in less than 3 seconds and even distinguish between heroin laced with synthetic painkillers and pure heroin. Over the course of 3 years, Kane was involved in more than 70 operations, directly contributing to stopping 9 federal-level shipments. He was a small legend remembered by his unit until something happened 1 year ago. That day, Kane's team raided a warehouse suspected of containing crystal meth. But it was a trap. His human partner, Officer Daniels, was shot twice in the chest and killed instantly. Kane was struck by falling bricks and trapped under debris for nearly 7 hours. They found him barely conscious, eyes, swollen mouth, bloody. Since then, Kane was no longer used in frontline missions. Some veterinarians concluded that he showed signs of tactical stress disorder, overreacting to danger cues, barking persistently, losing control. But the old trainers, the ones who had survived countless border raids, whispered among themselves, "He is not unstable. He is just more awake than the rest." Kane was no longer fit for high-speed chases, but he was still an incredibly effective investigative tool. So he was reassigned to a place where it seemed he would never have anything to do again, Frostmill. A town no one mentioned, where crime, if it existed at all, melted into the snow like faded footprints. In his early days at Frostmill, Kane lived like a shadow in the police station. No one retrained him. No one gave him formal tasks. Some officers called him the broken dog and left him lying by the fireplace like an old pet. But Kane was not old. He was just quietly watching. During those first weeks, he never barked, never reacted to sirens, never chased stray cats. Until one day, someone brought a trash bag into the office, and Kane suddenly jumped up, clawing at the bag so hard he tore through the nylon. Inside was a packet of fentanyl, the kind that was supposed to have been sealed and destroyed 3 months earlier. No one knew why it had reappeared, but after that, no one ever called Kane broken again. Kane started going on patrols with a few younger officers, those who believed he could still sense something humans could not. He always behaved oddly when passing the neighborhood near Lake Vesper. Day or night, every time they reached the turnoff that led to the snow-covered path toward the lake, Kane would stop in his tracks, ears, straight eyes darting toward the woods. Some said it was the scent of wild animals. Others thought he was just missing the job. But Eli Turner did not believe that. Eli was not a man of many words. Since moving to Frostmill, he had kept to himself, never socialized, never complained, never shared stories. People at the station called him the city cop from the mountains, half joke, half wary. Because in this place the silence of an outsider was always met with suspicion. He never explained why he transferred, never spoke of his past. All anyone knew from his file was that he used to be a forensic officer in Grand Rapids, a major city with a drug crime rate 10 times higher than Frostmill. Some thought he had been demoted. Others guessed it was a scandal. But the truth was much more complicated and much quieter than that. Eli did not come to Frostmill to run away. He came to hear the sound of his conscience again, after too many years in a city where the wailing of sirens felt easier to bear than the cries for help no one listened to. In 8 years as a forensic analyst, Eli had seen more bodies than he could count. But one case had made him question everything. A teenager was arrested for possessing illegal substances, not even old enough to be considered a minor. Eli had tested the sample and signed off that it was enough to detain him. The boy was sent to a holding center. 3 days later, he died of an overdose. The report stated self-injected smuggled drug. It all made sense, too much sense. But in one of the crime scene photos, Eli saw the boy's eyes wide open, like he had seen it coming. No one broke any rules, no one made a mistake, and yet everything felt wrong. From that moment, Eli stopped believing in a system good enough to fix itself from the inside. He requested a transfer not to find peace in a quiet town, but because he needed a place where time moved slower, where if a body was in the wrong place, someone might still have a chance to notice. Frostmill was his first choice, and probably his last. Here, Eli told no one about his past. He focused on his duties, paperwork patrols, the occasional community outreach. Nothing difficult, nothing stressful, but also nothing truly alive. Until he met Kane. At first he paid no attention, just a retired dog with a shut-down gaze, odd responses, not friendly. But on one patrol, Eli noticed how Kane sniffed the air near the eastern neighborhood by the lake, not urgently, not panicked, but methodically. Like a seasoned soldier who had seen something others missed. Eli slowed his pace. Kane slowed too. He stepped to the left. Kane turned his head and looked back. As if asking, "Do you want to check? I will take you." From that day forward, Eli no longer saw Kane as just a K9. He was a silent partner, and the only thing in this town incapable of staying silent when it smelled death. Even so, Eli kept his distance. He did not bond easily, not with people, not with animals. Because he knew once he allowed himself to truly look at something, he could no longer look away. But Frostmill did not make trust easy. On the surface it was a frozen town, but underneath a web of silence stretched in all directions. Eli used to think he was sharp enough not to get caught in any of it. Until that night. The night Kane barked for the first time and shattered the thick cold of Lake Vesper. The night Eli, not because of training, not because of instinct, but because of a feeling he could not name, was compelled to step forward. Because sometimes people do not choose with reason. They choose when their silence becomes unbearable. Cold vapor rose from the tunnel entrance that had just been pried open, carrying a stench so sharp that Eli instinctively turned his face away. It was not just the smell of decay, it was chemical too. Something antiseptic, something meant to preserve, but failing to hide the scent of death. He shone his flashlight downward. A metal staircase led deep into the earth. Kane stood at the edge of the tunnel, not barking, not whining, just watching as if waiting for Eli to give a sign. But Eli said nothing. Kane had already gone ahead, silent as a shadow. Footsteps echoed on the steel floor. Below was a small chamber about 215 square feet, or roughly 20 square meters, sealed like an industrial freezer. The walls were lined with thermal panels. Above, rusted cooling pipes still hummed faintly. The air was so cold that Eli's breath turned to mist the moment he stepped inside. The ceiling light flickered, but the beam from his flashlight was enough. In the center of the room stood a large metal container, similar to a hospital morgue freezer. Its lid was not locked, just loosely covered by a sheet of old plastic. Kane did not move closer. He stood by the edge, sniffed briefly, then stepped back. Just one step, as if he already knew what was inside, but wanted the human to see it for himself. Eli pulled the plastic aside. 3 bodies, 3 young men. No ID, no restraints, no personal belongings. They lay side by side, heads, tilted eyes, half closed, faces pale. Their skin was blotched with signs of blood pooling, common in deaths caused by potent toxins. One still had a syringe stuck in his left arm, the veins swollen as if something too strong had been injected too fast. Eli breathed slowly, lighting their torsos. The evidence suggested they had been dead for no more than 2 days. But that was not the strange part. Their bodies had not decomposed. Not at all. Under normal conditions, decomposition begins clearly after 48 hours, especially in drug users whose immune systems are usually weak. But here, they were preserved, as if someone had deliberately kept them in a semi-fresh state, not alive, not quite dead. Kane left the table, circled the room, sniffing along each wall. When he reached a small vent in the northeast corner, its fan long inactive, He let out a soft growl, then began scratching the floor. Eli knelt. Beneath the thin tiles was a shallow compartment covered with a piece of wood. He pried it open. Inside were 3 vacuum-sealed bags filled with white powder. Each bore a laser-stamped code, S37F, a logistics code, not something commercial. This was internal, meant for federal health agencies, rehabilitation facilities, or pharmaceutical plants. He swept the light back across the bodies. One had a faded tattoo on his neck, clean. Tomorrow, the name of a controversial rehab program, once accused of testing new drugs on the homeless 3 years ago. The case had briefly hit the news, then disappeared, citing lack of evidence. The room was suffocating in its silence. Every detail was a hazy puzzle piece, not enough to convict, but more than enough for Eli to know this was no accident. Not self-injected, not an unfortunate overdose. Someone had created these deaths and preserved them as part of a process. Kane looked up toward the tunnel mouth. His eyes locked onto the snowy path leading back to the woods. No words were needed. Eli understood what they saw today was just the surface layer, and beneath this frozen town, deeper, darker layers were still moving even as he stood there. The preliminary report was submitted by Eli to the command office early the next morning. He typed every detail without leaving anything out: the location of the tunnel, descriptions of the 3 victims, the syringe, the laser-printed transport code, and the cold storage setup that clearly did not match any typical death scenarios. Eli did not outright state it was a crime, but his report, if read closely, was a warning that could not be clearer. And then he waited. 1 day, 2 days. There was no emergency meeting. No one asked him for further information. No order to seal off the scene. No independent examiner. No press and no internal case opened for investigation. There was only one email from Acting Chief Clay Danner containing a single line. At this time, there is not sufficient legal basis for a criminal classification. Please maintain confidentiality and avoid speculative statements. Eli read that sentence over and over. Every word was technically correct, but what was wrong was the silence. Cold, deliberate, and unmistakably intentional. That evening, when he returned to the station, Eli discovered that his report had been removed from the internal sharing system. In the case file system, the status field now read, "Temporarily closed, awaiting further review." The estimated cause of death field, suspected unidentified drug-related shock. Kane lay still under the desk, but Eli clearly saw one of his ears twitch as soon as he read that line. You did not have to be human to sense something was off. The air in the room felt like something had been tightly packed down, compressed like trash being crushed to avoid overflow. The next day, Eli went back to the scene. The tunnel door was now locked with a new padlock. No warning signs, no tape, no official forensic seal. Just a shiny new lock with bolts screwed in tight. He tried contacting the Federal Forensics Office only to receive a short response. The case has not been referred for higher-level investigation. No file has been opened. Kane followed him all the way to the lake's edge. As they turned to leave the snowy slope, the dog looked back. No bark, no growl, just a steady gaze, as if whatever was there still had not settled. The following night, Eli returned to the station for the overnight shift. He intended to check the patrol cameras positioned along the path to Lake Vesper. But when he accessed the video storage system, he realized that all footage from the past 5 days had been completely erased. At that moment, he heard a knock at the office door. It was Lieutenant Rick, the officer in charge of patrol. Rick looked at Eli, scratched his head, then lowered his voice. "Are you sure? You want to keep going with this?" Eli stayed silent. Rick continued. Maybe it is drug trafficking. Maybe it is testing. But if it involves a federal logistics system, you might want to back off." Eli asked, "Do you know something?" "I do not." Rick looked down at his feet and said nothing. He just gave Eli a quiet pat on the shoulder and walked away. That night, Kane scratched at the storage room door inside the station. Eli followed by instinct. Kane ran straight to a dark corner where evidence marked destroyed was kept. He growled softly, then scratched at a sealed cardboard box. Eli opened it. Inside was a plastic bag containing a white powder off-white, no label, but beside it was a small packet with faint lettering at the edge, Test 14C, not approved for distribution. No control code, no attached documents, and clearly no reason for that evidence to still be there. Eli took a photo, resealed it carefully. He did not upload it to the system. This time he trusted no one but himself. When he left the storage room, Kane was still by the door. But this time he did not look back at Eli. He lifted his ears toward the main workroom where other officers were laughing and chatting as if everything were perfectly normal. And Eli understood the truth was not in the files. It was being forced to disappear, step by step, line by line, piece by piece. 2 days after the discovery of the unnamed evidence, Eli was woken up in the middle of the night by Kane scratching at the door. He did not bark, but the scratching was urgent and firm, the kind of scratching from an animal not trying to get attention, but making a demand. Eli threw on his coat, opened the door, and Kane immediately bolted east toward a patch of thin woods that bordered a poor residential area and an old trail that once led to Lake Vesper before the lockdown. Beneath Kane's paws, the snow was soft and sunken, scattered with bottle shards, bike tire tracks, and the remnants of a nightlife lived by people society no longer bothers to name. Kane did not slow down. He ran deeper into the woods past a charred grove of trees and came to a sudden stop in front of a low bush. His eyes locked onto a spot on the ground where a silver-gray plastic bag lay tied with a piece of rope, like someone had tried to toss it quickly but did not have the nerve to throw it into the river. Eli stepped closer and knelt. He gently pulled the rope, peeled back the outer plastic. His hand touched something soft, ice-cold and sticky. He paused for 3 seconds, then opened the rest. A female body, no older than 20. She was wearing a dark, worn sweater with no signs of struggle or bruising, but her eyes were open. The whites faded, like all color had been drained from them. Her face and arms were so pale they were almost translucent. Under the sweater, there were no visible fatal wounds, but just below the left collarbone there was a small, deep injection mark, no blood, poorly covered with a piece of medical tape. Eli placed 2 fingers on her neck artery. It was stone cold. But what unsettled him even more than the signs of death was how unusually light her body felt. As if something had been taken, not an object, but something alive from the inside. He removed his gloves, took out his knife, and made a small incision in her arm. No blood came out, no clotting, no leakage, no pooling beneath the skin. The veins had collapsed like straws, sucked completely dry. Eli took a deep breath. He had seen overdose victims before, but this was different. No foam at the mouth, no pulmonary frothing, no seizures. This girl's body looked like it had been drained of blood before her heart even stopped beating. Kane moved around the scene. He sniffed in a circle, then stopped near a chopped tree stump. Beneath it were a few items discarded in haste, a pair of medical gloves, an empty IV bag, and a small medication bottle with a label that read heparin sodium, IV use only, human plasma stabilizer. Eli knew what it was. It prevents blood from clotting once removed from the body, typically used in transfusions or mass sampling. He stood still in the snow, listening to the wind slicing through the woods, Feeling like every detail was cutting into the fake sense of order this town had been trying so hard to preserve. The first body could have been written off as an overdose, but this girl, with a precise injection site, a neatly placed body, and traces of medical procedure, this was no accident. This was a prepared death, managed, relocated. Eli took photos, marked the scene, then immediately attempted to file an internal report. But the local dispatch responded, temporary network outage. Please try again later. He recorded a full audio description, saved the file to a private memory card, then wrapped the body in a backup tarp. He did not bring it to the station. He did not let anyone else see it. Not yet. On the way back, Kane veered onto another path leading to the back fence of the Frostmill Community Support Center. It used to be a charity clinic. Now, it operated as a rehabilitation, detox, psychological support facility for transients. In the far corner of the building, faint tire tracks were pressed into the ice. A small vehicle, heading out, not long ago. Eli bent down. A single long hair was caught on a low branch, the same dark brown color as the girl he had just found. He straightened the hair and placed it in a sealed evidence pouch. He said nothing. Kane sat down and turned to look at him. His eyes held no fire, no alarm. Just a calm that was almost unnerving, like he had known this would happen. And Eli began to understand. They had already crossed the threshold. There was no turning back now. 3 days after discovering the girl's body, Eli spent his entire night shift tracing tire tracks around the forest near Lake Vesper. The snow was thick, but in certain stretches, parallel grooves appeared, looping from the old ranger station in the north, cutting through the dense black woods, then veering sharply toward the lake's edge. What was strange was how shallow the tracks were, meaning the vehicle was not heavy, but the pattern repeated in a consistent rhythm, almost every 3 to 4 days. Eli marked each intersection, gradually tracing an almost invisible path, no signposts, no name, but clearly driven regularly. Kane led the way, ears perked high-nose, drawing in every gust of wind that swept across the trail. At a steep incline, he stopped abruptly. A large tree had been cut down, and tire marks brushed against it. Behind it was a narrow footpath, nearly invisible to the eye, only revealed when the flashlight caught tiny stones scattered by passing tires. Eli knelt down and picked up a small, transparent plastic cap, shaped and colored exactly like the kind used for intravenous injection. He placed it into the evidence pouch, then gently nudged Kane forward. The path led to a clearing where a rundown wooden shack stood with a dented tin roof and rotting plank walls. It looked like an abandoned rest stop with no signs of occupancy. But the moment Kane approached, he began growling, low, steady, and full of warning. Eli moved close to the wall. Inside there was a faint humming, not an engine, but something like a small generator. He pried the side door open and pushed gently. No one was inside, but the sharp sting of antiseptic hit his nose immediately. In the center of the room was a foldable stainless steel bed. Next to it stood an IV pull tubes, gauze, and medical gloves. Everything was organized with unsettling precision, not like a shelter, but like a temporary treatment room with a medical purpose. On the wall behind a wooden shelf, Eli found a small hidden camera, the mini Wi-Fi type, still powered with a faint blinking green light. He did not touch it, just filmed it. Under the desk was a crumpled piece of paper, as if stepped on and discarded. Eli picked it up and unfolded it. It was a dosage tracking sheet, initials, patient codes, injection times, reactions like a clinical log from a treatment center. One line was circled in red mm. Test D315, seizure after 12 minutes. No cardiac response. Sent. Just that last word sent a chill through him. Sent. Sent where? At the same time, Kane discovered a wooden crate buried under a pile of discarded medical waste in the corner of the shack. He clawed off the cloth draped over it, revealing a green military-style container, the kind used for transporting biological samples or organs over long distances. A torn label on the outside read "Cold Chain Shipment. Federal Routing C8N Meek." Eli recognized it immediately. That was a routing code used for special shipments on the Federal Transport Network linking the Northeast to Michigan. It was typically used for medical equipment organs or research samples. No one except federal health agencies or research institutions had the authority to use that code. A covert supply chain. And this shack could very well be the initial transit point. Eli returned to the police station to check the delivery logs, but the system was temporarily locked down for internal server maintenance. He tried accessing it from his personal device. After nearly an hour of digging, he found a manifest listing item shipped out of Frostmill under mobile clinical quarantine. The signatory S. Danner, same last name as the acting police chief. That night, Eli did not sleep. He sat in front of the town map, piecing it together. Lake Vesper was not just a place to hide bodies. It was a closed-loop transfer line where people were processed, tested, transported, and erased, a perfect cycle no one questioned, because the victims were just addicts, nobodies, people no one looked for. And that night, Eli made a vow to himself. If one more child was brought here, he would not let them be shipped out like cargo again. That evening, Kane refused to leave the room. He lay still by the door, eyes wide, ears upright, breathing steady but sharp. Every time Eli stepped into the hallway, Kane would follow, sniff at the wall seams, then return to the threshold. Eli understood. Something was still unfinished, and Kane would not rest until he led him all the way. That night's snowfall was heavier than any before. The entire town was buried under a blanket of white, as if someone wanted to erase the traces of the previous day. But Eli knew the whiter it was, the more the rot underneath gave off its scent. They returned to the wooden shack from that morning, tracing the same old tire tracks. From there, Kane turned in a new direction, leading Eli to an old warehouse district about 1 mile away from Lake Vesper, near an abandoned railway line. This area used to be a freight hub back when Frostmill still traded goods. Now it was nothing but rusted shipping containers and twisted sheet metal shelters. Kane stopped in front of a green container unlocked with no seals. He circled it 3 times, nose pressed to the ground, then let out a sharp, cutting growl. Eli pulled the door open. Inside was darkness and the mixed smell of antiseptic and dried urine. His flashlight scanned the space. Empty. Except for a cot, a few discarded restraints, and a small figure curled up in the far corner under a blanket. Eli rushed forward. It was a boy, no more than 15 years old. Thin, pale lips, cracked and dry. His hands were tied with fabric, but not tightly. A used syringe was still stuck in his right forearm, wrapped with old, torn medical tape. Eli pulled back the blanket and checked his pulse, still beating. Faint, but steady. The boy's eyes fluttered open. No panic. No struggle. Just a dry, raspy breath followed by a whisper. "Please, do not inject me again. I have had enough." Eli gave him water. The boy drank like someone who had been starved for days. His eyes began to clear, and what broke Eli's heart was not fear, but familiarity. This boy had become used to being caged, injected, tested. After nearly 30 minutes of warming and first aid, Eli drove the boy to the nearest outpost station, one without internal surveillance, the same place he had hidden critical evidence days earlier. The boy's name was Luis, 14 years old, from a juvenile rehab center in St. Paul, listed as escaped 3 weeks prior. Luis spoke in broken, exhausted, but honest fragments. They said we were chosen to test a new treatment. If we survived, we would be released. But if not, he hesitated. They said we were just trash. No one would come looking. Eli could not speak. Luis closed his eyes, murmuring like a sleepwalker. "One time I saw a guy have a seizure, then they dragged him into a freezer box, pushed it out of the shack. No one ever said anything after that." Luis's story did not need to be long. Just one sentence, "We were just trash," was enough to rip Eli's heart in two. There was no doubt now these were not scattered deaths from drug use. This was an entire system of murder legalized through the anonymity of its victims. Luis was the living proof, the first soul Eli had to protect at all costs. He used his personal device to record everything Luis said, saved it in 3 copies. One he kept, one he emailed to a secure private inbox, and one he printed and tucked into the file of an unidentified victim, in case he did not survive long enough to tell the whole truth. Kane sat beside Luis, not moving an inch. Every time the boy shivered, Kane gently nudged his leg as if to comfort him. No words were needed, just loyalty and the unspoken truth that this life deserved to be saved. And in that exact moment, Eli knew this was no longer an investigation. It was a responsibility, not just to bring down the guilty, but to restore dignity to the children who had been declared dead before they ever truly died. Early the next morning, Eli returned to the Frostmill police headquarters. He did not tell anyone. He just quietly headed straight to the old evidence storage, once a chemical storage room back when the town still served as a transport hub. In his hand was a piece of plastic packaging that Kane had found on the floor of the underground chamber, printed with a scratched QR code, though the first 4 characters were still legible. He powered up the outdated internal server system and opened the old logistics software that hardly anyone used anymore. This was no longer part of Eli's official duties, but he had once been a forensic investigator, and he knew that if this code belonged to a federal system or a medical cooperation program, it would be stored for at least 7 years. Lines of code began to scroll. Slowly. At first, nothing came up, but when he cross-referenced the remaining code string with archived federal shipments in the region from 5 years ago, a dataset appeared. Eli held his breath. Among the batches labeled medical waste for disposal, 3 had codes that nearly matched their destination, listed as Vesper Cold Storage, an entity not registered in the commercial system. The person who signed off as receiver and processor on all 3 shipments, initials C. Danner. At first, Eli thought it might be a coincidence. But when he traced the town's personnel records, the truth emerged. Clay Danner, the current station chief, had previously served as logistics supervisor for a private rehab facility in southern Michigan that was shut down 7 years ago for suspected misuse of treatment drugs. A chill ran down Eli's spine. He began reviewing autopsy reports filed in Frostmill over the past 5 years. More than 20 deaths attributed to overdose had never been examined. All were homeless individuals, addicts, or rehab patients with no family. No one requested a second opinion, and no one questioned why so many deaths involved the same substance, next-generation fentanyl. Eli froze. At that exact moment, Kane barked outside the door. Eli stepped out and saw Kane staring toward Danner's office, ears up, eyes alert. Eli moved toward the command room, trying to stay casual, but his heart pounded when he saw Danner seated under the yellow office light, holding a silver pen, eyes fixed on him, as if he had known all along. "Turner. Still here this late checking old records, sir. Be careful. Sometimes knowing too much just makes you a target." Danner smiled, but his eyes did not. They were cold and hollow, like everything Eli had just discovered had already been anticipated. Eli kept his expression blank, gave a small nod, and left. But that night he did not go home. He packed all copies of the files, the extracted QR code data, and the old mini camera he had once strapped to Kane's collar as a joke Now the only piece of evidence that might save him if it all came crashing down. He began digging through Danner's personnel records. In addition to the closed rehab facility, Danner had also participated in a recovery drug safety pilot program funded by a private pharmaceutical firm, a program that had been sued by 3 families for making addiction worse instead of curing it. No one was convicted, no one held accountable, because every report had been officially signed and stamped by a logistics coordinator named Clay Danner. Eli had no more doubts Danner was the key link. He was not acting alone. He represented a system, and that system had existed long before Eli ever arrived here. In the darkness, Kane let out a soft growl. Eli turned. Kane was staring at Danner's parked vehicle across the street. The back tires were streaked with a fresh layer of red mud, the kind only found on the forest roads near Lake Vesper. He needed no more proof. Eli knew the killer was not far away. He was still wearing a badge, still giving orders, still murdering people through legal procedures. Eli did not sleep that night. Even after backing up and encrypting every file related to Clay Danner, he knew it would not be enough to bring a man like him down. People who have lived in darkness for so long, they do not fall because of one full stop. They only fall when even the light can no longer deny the truth. And the first light Eli needed was Luis's testimony. Early the next morning, he rushed to the temporary medical center where the boy had been taken after being rescued from the chamber. But the hospital bed was empty. No transfer file, no discharge paperwork. No one knew where Luis had gone. The nurse on duty stammered, "Someone came last night, said they were a relative, had documents, even a signed approval from the police station." Eli felt his heart tighten. He checked the system logs and found that his own staff ID had been used to authorize Luis's release. Eli had been framed. Back at his car, Kane jumped into the passenger seat as usual. But the moment Eli stepped in, he froze. A faint, unfamiliar chemical scent drifted up. Kane barked loudly and clawed at the floor. Under the rubber mat, a vacuum-sealed plastic pouch containing white powder and a small tracking chip. Just that alone, if discovered, would be enough to charge Eli with possession of a high-level narcotic. Sweat broke out along Eli's neck. Right then, his phone buzzed. An anonymous message, no number, "Stop now. This is not your fight. Keep yourself alive." Eli knew they were watching him, and Luis, the boy he thought he had saved, might already be back in their hands, or worse. There was no other way. Eli pulled the mini camera from Kane's collar, a device he had used to record Kane's drug detection work, and clipped it to his waistband like a body cam. He copied all digital files to an encrypted USB, then slipped it into Kane's collar tucked beneath his ID tag. Just hours later, Eli received a formal summons from Clay Danner ordering him to report to the station for exceeding jurisdiction and mishandling evidence. Eli did not go. He and Kane left Frostmill that night. No GPS, no credit cards. Just an old laptop, 3 backup fuel cans, a notebook filled with case notes, and Kane, the only companion who had never betrayed him. But they had not gotten far before a local television station broadcast a breaking story: police are searching for Officer Eli Turner, wanted in connection with a suspected drug trafficking operation. A large quantity of fentanyl was discovered in his vehicle. The truth was being twisted. Danner had not just set a trap, he was rewriting the narrative so that Eli could not even speak. If Eli said a word, everything would be dismissed as a criminal making excuses. In the dark, Eli and Kane pulled into a clearing near the border, a spot where Eli had once interned during forensic training. He opened his laptop, reviewed Kane's camera footage, and there it was, a clear clip showing Kane uncovering the pouch of white powder beneath the car mat, the timestamp matching perfectly. It was a glimmer of hope, a fragment that might still stitch the truth back together. Eli wrote to a former colleague, someone who had worked in DEA internal affairs, attaching the video file and transport system records. He hoped if he could not tell the whole story, someone somewhere might at least begin to listen. As for himself, all he could do was keep running. Kane remained by his side, silent and steady, but his eyes were always scanning the rear, as if he understood that the thing chasing them was not just one dirty cop, but an entire system that knew how to bury bodies like trash and how to turn a loyal dog's bark into meaningless noise. In the early days of running, Eli did not rest. Under the faint glow of a tactical flashlight, he combed through every file, every frame Kane had recorded during their time together. The video of Kane discovering the white powder in the car, Eli encrypted it and sent it everywhere, to independent journalists, to underground investigators, to NGO groups. But all responses were silence. A silence so complete, it was terrifying. Eli knew unless there was a living witness, a real person, all the data would be dismissed as delusions of a fugitive. And the only name left for him to cling to was Luis. Small clues began to surface. A blurry photo shared in a closed forum for healthcare workers, a teenager who looked like Luis lying in an isolation room, wrists bound to the bed. An IP address traced to a border medical outpost. Eli followed the lead, crossing hundreds of miles of white wilderness, with Kane, no sleep, no phone signal, no trust in anyone. They reached the coordinates, an old abandoned medical station, like a Cold War field clinic. But when Kane entered, he barked loudly, the sound echoing through the empty hallway, answered by a weak moan from the basement. Eli ran down. In a dim room lit by red emergency light, Luis lay on a stainless steel table, eyes shut, pulse fading. A fresh needle mark on his arm, a ligature bruise on his neck. There was no doubt they were trying to process the boy again, as if Luis were a failed test sample that needed to be discarded. Kane bit through the restraints. Eli injected a life-saving dose of adrenaline, then wrapped Luis in an emergency warming blanket. Hours later, when Luis opened his eyes, they widened in fear, then softened in recognition. You were the one who got me out of the pit. Eli gripped his hand. And this time I am taking you somewhere safe. Though still weak, Luis was alert enough to finish his story. After being taken from the pit, he was shuffled through various locations, each labeled as medical, but inside were people in hazmat suits, no names, no ID tags. He once overheard them mention a phrase, batch transfer station B, which he believed was where addicts who were dead or comatose were sent for final processing. Eli recorded everything. No pressure. Luis, still shaken, recounted each detail willingly. Every word was like tearing away the fog surrounding Clay Danner's operation and the machine behind it. Eli knew just one more step and the truth would be exposed. And this time, he had more than data. He had a witness. Flesh and blood. Kane stood at the door, keeping watch through the night. In his eyes there was no doubt, only readiness. They had stepped into a war, and retreat was no longer an option. Eli could not wait any longer. After backing up all the data and hiding Luis in an abandoned cabin with all satellite signals disabled, he and Kane began their journey back to Frostmill, not to surrender, but to strike the first blow. That night, the snowfall was unusually heavy. The sky was dark, as if warning of a coming storm. Eli let Kane run ahead with a camera strapped to the dog's neck, transmitting live footage back to the laptop in Eli's backpack. They needed to return to the edge of the woods, the place where they had previously found the shack with the hidden camera. If Kane could trace the scent again, there was a real chance of recovering footage of the walking dead being transported through the forest. But this time, they were no longer ghosts in the dark. just minutes after Kane uncovered a device box buried under an old maple tree camouflaged under layers of dead leaves and snow. Eli heard the roar of an engine in the distance. Headlights swept across the snow. They knew he had come back. A gunshot cracked through the silence. A bullet slammed into the trunk of a tree, inches from where he stood. Kane growled and spun around, bolting into the forest. Eli darted between tree branches, ducked behind a boulder. They were not trying to arrest him. They wanted him gone like everyone who had known too much. Kane led him down a sloping path, weaving through a thick forest edge where no vehicle could follow. The pursuers were driving pickups, but when the ground began to freeze and the incline grew slippery, they were forced to go on foot. That was the only opening. Through the radio, fragmented commands crackled in. He cannot reach the relay point. Handle it tonight. Eli understood if the transmission did not go out, all the data would mean nothing. And he was running out of time. Suddenly, Kane stopped. In front of them was a rocky trench once used for logging back in the 1980s. Beneath it, a collapsed tunnel, but still just wide enough for a man and a dog to crawl through. Without hesitation, Eli followed Kane. The footsteps behind them grew closer. They crawled through darkness, guided only by the faint light on Kane's collar. The air was thick with mold and rust. At the end of the tunnel was an old wooden wall. Eli kicked hard. The door gave way. They burst out behind an abandoned warehouse, the same one where Kane had previously detected a hidden stash. Eli bolted the door shut, set up the transmission device, and activated the high-speed uplink. Every image from Kane's collar cam was compressed and uploaded. Right then, flashlight beams swept past the window. A group approached. Leading them was the deputy chief, the one who had ignored every report Eli ever filed. He shouted, "Eli, surrender now. You are breaking federal security protocols." Eli said nothing. He attached the transmitter to Kane's collar and whispered, "If I do not make it out, you run. Head straight to the old ranger station. They will see the satellite signal." Kane growled as if he understood it all. The door burst open. Eli darted in one direction, drawing fire. Kane ran the other way, beacon blinking. Bullets flew past his ears. But the dog never stopped, because at that moment the lives of everyone in Frostmill and those buried under the lake depended on one instinct that never lied and one heart that never betrayed. Kane vanished into the storm like an arrow through snow. Beneath the dim moonlight and the thick falling snow, Eli was left with only a gun, a combat knife, and the truth if he lived long enough to tell it. The footsteps behind had lost track of him. Eli moved along the slope, blood dripping down his face from a fall in the rocky trench. He knew exactly where Danner would go, the old Forest Service lookout tower, sitting on the boundary between Frostmill and the Northern National Forest. It was outside local police jurisdiction, but discreet enough for one final transaction. And just as he expected, a pickup truck was parked beneath the rotting wooden tower. Dim light leaked through its windows. Eli crept closer, each step silent. Inside the watchroom, Clay Danner stood with his back turned, speaking into a satellite phone. He had a camera on the dog. The data went out. I do not know who received it, but if I find him, I will end it. No one else knows about this but me. His voice was calm, unhurried. Every word rolled like stones down a cliff. Danner hung up and turned around and saw Eli. Two men stood facing each other, separated only by a rotting wooden desk. "You should not have come back," Turner Danner said, drawing a pistol from his hip. "I thought you were smarter." This is not a game of cops and robbers. This is a battlefield. And sometimes, people need to die to keep peace. Eli raised his gun. What kind of peace involves kids being buried alive under the snow? While you turn this town into a backyard lab, Danner smirked. "You still do not get it. I do not control everything. I am just a link in the chain." If I fall, someone else takes my place. Do you even know how much money flows through here? You think junkies die by accident? No, it is strategy. It unburdens the system, cleans up the trash. Trash, Eli nearly shouted. They are people, no Turner. You are still too compassionate. Danner raised his gun, and compassion tends to die young. Before he could fire, a growl thundered behind him. Kane crashed through the door, shattering the window glass. Danner's aim veered. Eli seized the moment, lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. They grappled. Danner scrambled for the gun. Kane bit down hard on his arm, pinning him. In the flickering light, Kane did not kill. He held, waiting for a command. Eli picked up the gun, panting. "We have it all on camera," he said. "The whole country is going to know your name as a murderer with a clean badge and a decorated record." Danner spat, blood eyes still icy. "You think they will let you live after this?" Eli did not answer. He called for backup using the emergency satellite signal transmitted from Kane's device. The data had been sent. Minutes later, federal helicopters swept spotlights over the tower. An arrest order was issued on the spot. As they cuffed Danner, a federal officer asked, "Who led us here?" Eli looked at Kane standing still in the snow, then said, "Someone who never needed to talk, just barked at the right time." Under the pale yellow beams of the federal helicopter, Clay Danner was escorted out of the watchtower like a fallen symbol. Snow kept falling, not fiercely, but steadily, and cold like the way this town had once swallowed every truth. Eli said nothing. He stood beside Kane, the dog's eyes still fixed on Lake Vesper, as if he knew the nightmare was not over, only paused. The next day, word spread across Frostmill. For the first time in years, federal police vehicles flooded a town that had once been forgotten. Rehab centers across the region were inspected all at once. Some staff volunteered to resign that very night. The rest silent, as if they had never known a thing. Lake Vesper was placed under full restriction. Divers discovered a secondary tunnel system, one that connected secretly to a transport route leading out of the northern forest and straight to an old pharmaceutical facility across the Canadian border. The synthetic drug ring was confirmed to be part of a cross-national underground network with links inside the local government. But what truly shook the town was not the network's existence, it was the number of confirmed victims. In the 3 weeks that followed, investigators recovered 18 bodies, most of them young adults from rehab centers. All had gone missing without explanation over the past 5 years. Most had no family to claim them. Some had been erased from the system entirely. Luis, the boy Kane had saved, became one of the key witnesses. After recovering, he was moved to a safe location for treatment. In a quiet conversation with Eli, he said something that would stay with him forever. "If it were not for that dog, I would have just been another body. Like the others, the ones they chose not to come back." Frostmill began to change, not loudly, not with banners, but clearly. A small memorial was held by the lake. No speeches, just candles and a wooden sign for those no one remembered by name. On the ice, Kane stood silently watching the flickering flames. His tail moved slightly, not in joy, but as a gesture of farewell. Eli filed for reassignment, not back to a big city, and not out of the force. He requested to join the federal investigations team focused on abuse of power in rehab and healthcare systems. On the form, he wrote only one line: "This is a job that someone needs to do." Kane went with him as a companion. No title, no medals needed. The story of Frostmill never made national headlines. It was drowned out by louder news. But to those who had lived in that shadow, who had walked through the cold of snow and silence, this case marked the end of a long, hopeless stretch, and the beginning of something else, a journey to restore dignity to those once labeled as society's trash. time passed. The snow melted slowly along the road surrounding Lake Vesper, revealing the dark, damp earth beneath, a quiet reminder that no matter how deeply the past is buried, it never stays buried forever. After the case, Eli and Kane were not hailed as heroes by the town. No statues were raised, no national news segments were aired. But to those who were nearly forgotten, the young people from rehab centers, the families who lost their children without ever getting answers, they were the first light to pierce a darkness that had lasted far too long. Luis was transferred to a psychological support center for minors in Minnesota. During a special interview, the quiet, cautious boy said only one sentence about the man who saved him. "He never promised to rescue me. He just kept following that dog, and that saved me." From Luis's testimony and the footage recorded by the camera on Kane's collar, a federal investigation expanded across 5 states, covering rehab facilities that had once transferred people through Frostmill. Multiple centers lost their licenses. Small pharmaceutical chains once used as fronts to legitimize chemicals for fentanyl production were prosecuted and shut down. Eli did not return to a desk job. He joined a mobile task force constantly moving through cold zones, border towns, and remote places where the law had never really set foot. And wherever he went, he brought Kane. Not as a tool, but as a teammate, a soul who shared the same battle. Kane never forgot how to track. Even as age slowed him down, he remained sensitive to toxic chemicals. He would always growl near places that smelled of counterfeit drugs, scents that humans could not detect, but Kane had never once mistaken. One day during a training session for new K9 units, a young officer asked Eli, has he ever received a medal or some kind of honor? Eli looked at Kane lying silently in the corner, eyes half closed but ears still twitching, and replied, "He does not need those things. He just needs to be believed." The story of Frostmill to most people is just a closed wound, but to Eli, it is a warning never to forget. Because corruption does not begin with great evil. It begins with small nods to what is wrong. One time looking away, one time staying silent, one time choosing to do nothing. And when truth becomes the first casualty, no one else is ever truly safe again. From that day on, Eli's team always had a spot for a dog once considered broken. And in the hearts of those who had been saved, there remained a fragile hope that no matter how cold the world gets, someone out there will still smell injustice, bark at it, and dive headfirst into the ice. There are some stories that, when they end, leave behind no applause, no curtain call, no sweeping soundtrack, just a long, lingering emptiness, like stepping out of a room where terrible things were once hidden only to find the outside world unchanged, as if nothing had ever happened. The story of Kane and Eli is like that. And like many other stories, it would be forgotten unless someone tells it again, unless someone chooses to speak. In Frostmill, some deaths were once labeled natural overdoses or handled according to procedure. But now, you know, not all of them were accidents. Not everyone who vanished wanted to disappear. And not every death came from drugs. Sometimes it came from indifference that lasted too long. If you are watching this video and feel your heart sink, do not scroll past like it is just a movie or a piece of entertainment. Because somewhere in the real world, other kids like Luis are still being locked away. Other dogs like Kane are being discarded because they no longer serve a purpose. And people like Eli are still fighting alone in silence. Think about this. What if Kane had not growled that night? What if Eli had turned away? What if both had stayed silent? Maybe there would have been one more body. Maybe an entire generation would have been forgotten. You do not need to be a cop or a K9 handler to make a difference. You just need not to stay silent. When you see something wrong, speak up. When you see injustice, step forward. When someone needs to be heard, be the first to listen. Because sometimes the only thing standing between someone being left behind and someone being saved is a single bark and one person willing to follow it to the end. If you believe justice should not arrive too late, if you believe the truth deserves to be seen, share this video. Let Kane's bark not be lost in the wind. Let every viewer from you to someone far away remember this truth never dies. It only waits for the right person to dig it up. And maybe that person is you.